I'm going to read an excerpt from Ken's War, the young adult novel. To set up the scene, Ken has been in Japan with his dad now for 2 years. He's 17 years old, and during this time he has developed a little bit of a crush on a young Japanese woman. His father has forbidden him to be with her. But the way kids are, you can guess what I'm going to say next. Ken and Yasuko have spent the whole night together at a Japanese festival, and now they're coming home. There has been a storm, so the setting is a little bit, there's downed trees and things like that. Ken picked up a flat stone and winged it across a muddy pond. The stone skipped to the opposite side. By the time morning sounds of birds and creaky well handles started up, Yasuko was his equal in the art of skipping stones. They were both pretty happy about that. They heard a vehicle approaching, and without consulting each other, they ducked behind some bushes. The army jeep sped by, ground its gears, and reversed. "Does your father know you're out this time of night with a—" Major Bellamy in a driver's seat made a spitting noise. His flashlight beam stabbed Ken's eyes. "It's not night." Ken attacked the part of the question that didn't pose troublesome implications. "It's 0500 hours, Bellamy said. What say you kids jump in the back now?" "That's okay," Ken said. His dad would be in bed for another hour and a half, long enough for Ken to think of how to face him, what to say, what not to say. "We don't need a ride. We'll walk." Bellamy glared at the young Japanese woman and then at Ken. "If I was you, I'd say goodbye to your friend here, and hop in the Jeep. Your old man'll go easier on you if you don't bring your friend along." "I'm not afraid of my father. I didn't do anything wrong." "If that's true, why don't you climb on board?" Bellamy asked. Ken helped Yasuko into the back of the Jeep. "You're too full of piss and vinegar." Bellamy's voice hinted at a grudging admiration. "Jerk," Ken muttered. The Major drove too fast over ruts and fallen branches. The Jeep bounced over a downed palm tree, launching them off their seats. Yasuko half stood to catch her geisha doll as it flew off her lap. Ken threw himself onto Yasuko to hold her and the doll down. He wasn't worried for himself. He'd take whatever punishment his dad dished out. And if his dad tried to hit him, why, he'd flip him on his ass. He could do that. He learned it in martial arts. And if that didn't work, he could at least bring the old man to his knees. He was sure of that. What were Yasuko's parents going to do to her when she returned home? How would they punish her? Would it be swift and symbolic? Would it be cruel and life-changing? Whatever her punishment was to be, it would be worse than what his father would do to him, because Yasuko wouldn't do anything to defend herself or assert herself. She would bear heavy shame for disobeying her parents, a bigger deal for her, than for Americans like him. He looked at her and couldn't read anything from her cool expression. "How will your parents punish you for being out all night with me?" he asked. "They will do nothing to you." So this was how she thought of him? A coward? Only worried about his own skin? "That's not what I meant," he protested. "I told you I'm not afraid. It's you I'm worried about. Can't you understand that, or don't Japanese care about other people?" The ease with which he'd unleashed this cruel remark surprised him. Maybe it was because she lured him to her, knowing that her parents would strongly disapprove of the relationship. "Sorry," he said, thinking he wasn't the only one who should be apologizing. She shook her head. Ken remembered the undisguised pride with which Yasuko's father, Mr. Watanabe, had explained the concept of filial duty to Ken after they'd seen that stupid Japanese movie. Ken looked at the side of Yasuko's face until she turned toward him. He said, "Your Japanese culture isn't the only one with filial duty." She turned away from him. He knew she'd heard what he'd said. Ken continued, "My dad brought me here to Japan to be with him. He could have left me in the States, but he didn't. We stick by each other." Saying it felt good. Mighty good.
I'm here with young adult novelist Beth Fowler, who is the author of Ken's War, which you just heard an excerpt from. Now, what I love about what you do is that you are part of like the hottest movement in all of what's going on in the literary world today with, we were talking earlier about Hunger Games, taking over, and young adult novels.
Right.
This idea that, these books are for kids, but they're not. They're adult themes, they're adult issues and struggles and emotions, but just written in that more accessible, more personal style. And you've got kids reading it, you've got adults reading it, you've really got the whole, market at your fingertips.
That's true, it's a huge market.
Just waiting. Is that what made you decide to write for young adults as opposed to writing for adults or for kids?
What made me decide to write this particular story was I actually met a man who was a martial arts instructor, a white man, and somehow it came out, he let me know that he had lived in Japan and was raised in Japan at that as a teenager, and I thought that must have been an incredible experience.
So what is it that made you choose this particular story? I mean, it's, of course, yes, it's interesting that someone lived in another culture, that they're completely different, but...
How often do you use these? Every day? No.
Okay.
Whoops. I thought I could do it.
All right, I think I remember you're supposed to hold one like you're holding a pencil.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, man. All right.
I find culture clash, culture shock a fascinating subject. Ken ends up in Japan.
It's so much harder than it looks.
Yeah, I know. There's a finesse to it. And I've seen women pick up pork chops with these. But anyhow, Ken is a teenager, which can be exciting enough. But he's thrown in Japan, where everything is upside down and backwards, to use his words. And we sometimes think, well, yeah, that's another country, culture shock. But have you ever, gone to a new school for the first time, and everything's all different, or you move to a different neighborhood, or even going to a friend's house?
That's true.
And it's different there. They do things differently. Some people from other cultures wonder, how the heck can we use a fork and not stab our tongue?
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. We got sharp knives. I had an English friend who was really, and you think England, America, it's the same language, it's very similar culture. And he was horrified because we shovel. We use our fork the right way and scoop stuff up.
Right.
And in England, they flip their fork over and put the food on the back. And what we were doing, he said, that is like a barbarian eating with their fingers. He was just appalled. And it was something that was so simple that I wouldn't have even noticed it. And I would never have thought about that as being a cultural difference. But he said it was hugely complicated for him just being in an American dining room.
Right.
So the idea of a whole different set of utensils, of different food, of not knowing the manners, not knowing what that's like. But I think you're right. It is still, it's more dramatic in this story when it's another country, a different language, but it's something that everyone can identify with, because at some time we've all felt like we were thrown in to an environment and we didn't know the rules, but we still had to figure out how to survive and how to connect and how to remember who we were.
It's humbling to be in another environment and not be quite sure what I'm supposed to do, what's okay, what's frowned upon.
So is it hard? I know that you said you had to cut huge sections of the book that you made a lot of changes based on those additional readers, based on that feedback, and then, based on your own evaluation. How do you decide what stays in and what goes?
The advice that I give other writers is, does it move the plot forward? Because writers love to do flashbacks because they're fun to write, but they're not necessarily fun to read unless they're giving us something. And the other thing I tell writers when they're self-editing is, be in a really bad mood when you're editing your own work.
I hate that. Yeah. It's terrible. Yeah. Get rid of it. Nice. And because I'm always interested in this, when you are working with other groups of writers, do you have like a writing group that you network with, that you read to and, take their advice throughout the process? Or do you tend to write something and then give it to somebody to just read the whole thing? How do you go about working with other writers?
All the above. And it's so easy now because there's all kinds of online resources.
That's very true.
You can get people to read and comment. I think it's really important to have a flesh and blood connection with people also to get some feedback.
So what about the publishing process? When you went about wanting to put this book out there, how did you go about deciding how you were going to publish it and get that work out to people?
I'm glad you asked that question. For anybody who's interested in marketing, here's the key. Know your target. I spent a lot of time pitching this to publishers of adult fiction. And then one day, this is young adult. The first publisher it went to, they accepted it. So it was all about my pitch, who I was targeting.
Nice.
Yeah.
So once they accepted the book, and then they started putting that out there. And I know, because this is a big thing with writers, is should I self-publish? Do I go with a small press? Do I go with a larger press? How do I go about marketing the book? How do I decide who to approach with this book?
Yeah.
So you said definitely find a publisher that's publishing what kind of book you want to write.
Which means we writers have to do some homework. You don't just jump on the website and submit your stuff. It's like, what are they publishing? Do they even have this kind of stuff? It's no fun getting rejection notices.
True. And yet part of the game.
Yeah, it's a big part of it.
Nice. So now that Ken is out there, what's next? Does he get a sequel, or are you ready to move on to something totally different?
What's next? That's a great question. I have 2 other books that are finished, but I want to keep
wow.
pushing this, so to speak, marketing, exposing it.
Right.
And when that's kind of settled down, then we'll see what happens with the next 2.
Ooh, fingers crossed. Well, make sure that you check and find Ken's War online. You can get it. It's available for download as well. You can Kindle it, and you can have it on your e-reader, or you can actually have a physical copy in your hands, which I freely admit I'm old-fashioned.
Yeah.
And I prefer my paper
too.
book. But a huge thanks to Beth for coming on the show and for sharing the book with us. I'm so excited, and I know that, well, I sincerely hope that our whole county decides that they're going to go out there and check it out.